Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're going on a virtual hike.
Sounds fun.
We're heading to Japan to explore some of their most legendary mountains, the ones that are honored as part of the Heijachi.
Ah, the 100 famous mountains of Japan.
Exactly. And our guide for this climb is a blog also called, well, Heija. It's got tons of great details on all these peaks.
So it's like a virtual pocket guide to these mountains?
Yeah. We want to give you the lowdown on not just the mountains themselves, but like what makes them so important to Japanese culture.
It's fascinating how these mountains are so much more than just geographical features. They're really intertwined with like history, spirituality, and art.
Yeah, totally. Like take Miyano Uradake,
On Yakushima Island.
right, Yakushima Island. The blog says it's the highest peak in Kyushu, but it's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. What does that even mean for a mountain to be a World Heritage Site?
Well, it means that Yakushima and like Miyano Uradake specifically is recognized as having like outstanding universal value.
Okay,
It could be for its beauty, like the natural beauty, or its biodiversity, or its cultural importance.
gotcha.
And Yakushima kind of has it all.
So we're talking about a mountain that rises straight out of the ocean.
Yeah.
That's got to be a sight to see.
Like, it's incredible.
So what makes it so special when it comes to biodiversity?
Well, Yakushima is famous for its ancient forests, especially the Yakusugi cedar trees.
The Yakusugi.
Yeah, some of those trees are thought to be like thousands of years old.
Thousands.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
They're like a living link to a time way before human history even began.
That's just wild. I mean, so it's not just about how tall the mountain is. It's like the whole ecosystem that makes it a World Heritage Site.
Right, exactly.
The blog also mentions a couple of different hiking trails, the Yodogawa and Arakawa trails.
hmm
Are those trails, you know, significant in some way, or are they just for the views?
Well, in Japan, hiking is often seen as more than just recreation.
Right.
It's a way to like connect with nature on a deeper level, almost like a pilgrimage.
I see.
And these trails, yeah, they offer great views, but they also wind through these like ancient forests, so hikers get to like experience that unique atmosphere and the biodiversity firsthand.
So it's about the journey, not just the destination.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like that. The blog also talks about Kaimondake and calls it the Satsuma Fuji because of its shape. It's like a cone.
Yeah, it's got that classic conical shape.
Are there a lot of these like mini Mount Fujis all over Japan?
Well, it's not really about having mini Fujis. It's more that the shape of Mount Fuji has this deep cultural meaning.
Interesting.
It symbolizes beauty and strength and even like spiritual purity.
Hmm.
So when another mountain like Kaimondake has a similar shape, it makes sense that people would draw those comparisons.
So even the shape of a mountain can tell us something about how important it is to the culture. Speaking of cultural importance, the blog mentions Saigo Takamori.
Yeah.
He was a historical figure, I think, and apparently a fan of Kaimondake. What's that all about?
Well, Saigo Takamori was a samurai and a really important statesman during the 19th century. He played a big role in the Meiji Restoration, big changes happening in Japan at that time. He was a big nature lover. And Kaimondake, it's beautiful, it must have really captured his imagination.
So these mountains draw in people from all walks of life, huh? Emperors to samurai.
It seems so.
Okay, let's move on to the Kirishima Mountains. This is a volcanic range, right?
Yes, spanning 2 prefectures, actually.
That sounds intense. What makes them stand out?
Well, for one thing, they're volcanically active.
Oh, wow.
So the landscape is constantly changing. You've got crater lakes and hot springs and volcanic peaks that really make you feel the power of nature.
Wow.
It's no wonder that volcanoes are so important in Japanese mythology and spirituality.
So we're not just talking about pretty scenery, right?
No, not at all.
There's a much deeper connection to the forces of nature at play here.
Uh-huh.
The blog mentions something called the Kirishima Shrine. Is that related to all this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Kurishima Shrine is dedicated to the deities associated with the mountains. It reflects that deep reverence for volcanoes and Japanese culture. It reminds us that for many people, these mountains are more than just rock formations. They're sacred spaces. They're inhabited by spirits and deities.
That adds a whole other dimension to these mountains. It's like they're a bridge between our world and the spiritual realm.
Mm-hmm.
The blog mentions Miyama Kirishima. It's some type of azalea. Is that unique to this region?
It is. Miyama Kirishima is a type of azalea that grows in the volcanic soil of the Kirishima Mountains. And they bloom in spring, so the mountainsides are covered in this vibrant pink.
Oh, wow.
It's a real contrast to that rugged volcanic terrain. It's a reminder that even in these harsh environments, beauty can still thrive.
So we've got active volcanoes, ancient shrines, beautiful flowers. It's like a sensory overload in the best way possible.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Let's move on to Asasan before we get too overwhelmed. The blog says it has one of the largest calderas in the world. Can you explain what a caldera is?
Sure. Caldera is a huge, like a cauldron-shaped depression that forms when a volcano erupts and then collapses in on itself.
Oh, wow.
Imagine a volcano so powerful that it just blows its top and the whole summit caves in, leaving this massive crater behind. That's what happened at Asasan.
Wow.
And the caldera is so big that it's got 5 different volcanic peaks inside it.
5 peaks in one caldera. That's mind-blowing.
It's pretty incredible.
The blog also mentions Kusasenri, a big grassland inside the caldera in Nakadaki, an active volcano where you can actually see volcanic activity. It all sounds almost like otherworldly.
It's definitely a landscape of contrasts, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You've got the serenity of Kusasenri, where horses graze with these volcanic peaks in the background. And then you have Nakadaki, where you can feel the ground shake and see plumes of smoke rising from the crater.
It's a reminder of the forces that shaped this incredible landscape.
We've gone from ancient forests to active volcanoes. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to see. What's next on our list?
Let's go north to Sobosan.
Sobosan.
It's also known as Grandmother Mountain. It's on the border of Oita and Miyazaki prefectures.
Grandmother Mountain.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's a mountain steeped in folklore and considered very sacred.
Grandmother Mountain. It sounds so welcoming. I'm sure it's still a tough climb, though.
Oh, definitely.
What's the story behind its spiritual significance?
Well, a lot of mountains in Japan are considered sacred, like they're home to deities or spirits.
Right.
So Bosan is no different. It's a place where people have always gone to connect with nature, to seek spiritual guidance.
I see.
Even the name Grandmother Mountain evokes a sense of, wisdom and nurturing, qualities often associated with mountains in Japanese culture.
It really makes you think about how our perception of nature is shaped by our cultural beliefs. In the West, we tend to view a mountain as a challenge to be conquered. But in Japan, there's this added layer of reverence. It's like the mountain itself is a living being worthy of respect.
That's a great point. It speaks to that deep connection between people and nature that's so important in Japanese culture.
Yeah.
Sabosan is also home to a huge variety of plants and animals. Dense forests of Japanese hemlock and beech trees, and rare flowers like Japanese peonies and bamboo lilies.
It's amazing how these tough environments can support such a variety of life.
It is.
Nature finds a way, huh?
It really does.
The blog also mentioned you might even spot some wildlife, like the Japanese siro.
Oh yeah, the Japanese siro, which is kind of goat antelope. It's pretty common in the mountains in Japan. They're incredibly agile, climbing those steep slopes.
And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll even spot a black bear.
You might, although they're much harder to find. Black bears are an important part of the ecosystem, but it's always good to be aware and take precautions when you're hiking in bear country.
Yeah, I think I'll admire them from a distance. We're almost at the end of this leg of our journey, but we still have more peaks to climb. What's next?
Kujusan in Oita Prefecture.
Kujusan.
It's another hiker's paradise, known for its amazing scenery and its varied trails.
What's it like?
Imagine vast grasslands, rolling hills, volcanic peaks, all bathed in the golden light of the setting sun.
Okay, I can picture it. It sounds like Kujusan offers something different from the other mountains we've talked about.
It does. Each of these mountains has its own character, its own story.
Oh.
And that's what makes exploring them so fascinating. We've only just begun to scratch the surface here.
It's like we've started this grand adventure, and we're only just getting started. We'll continue our exploration of Kujusan and the rest of Japan's amazing mountains in the next part of our deep dive. See you then.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to our virtual hike through Japan's majestic mountains. Are you ready for part 2?
I am, yeah. We're still exploring these incredible mountains, the ones honored as part of the Tumanjanal. I just love saying that. The 100 famous mountains of Japan. And I'm ready to go deeper into what we've learned about them.
It's pretty amazing how each of these mountains seems to offer a different perspective, not just on the landscape, but also on Japanese culture and history.
You're so right. It's like each peak is a chapter in a much larger story. And speaking of stories, I'm still thinking about those Yakusugi cedar trees on Yakushima. They're just unbelievable. What else can you tell us about them?
Well, the blog says that some of those trees, they think they might be over 7,000 years old. 7,000 years.
7,000. You're
Yeah,
kidding.
that means that they were growing back when humans were like just starting to figure out agriculture.
Wow, 7,000 years? That's older than the pyramids. To see one in person must be like, I don't know, stepping back in time.
It is. The blog describes them as having this mystical aura. I mean, they've lived through countless storms, seen empires rise and fall, and they're still standing. Just a testament to, the resilience of nature.
It makes you wonder what secrets they hold, what stories they could tell.
Yeah.
What is it about Yakushima that lets these trees live so long?
Well, it's a lot of things. The climate is super humid, lots of rain all year round.
Okay.
It creates this lush, almost primeval environment, and it's like perfect for those slow-growing cedars.
So it's kind of like a rainforest in Japan.
You could think of it that way. Yakushima is often called the Green Island because it's so densely vegetated. And it's not just the rain, the granite bedrock is also important.
Okay.
It provides those trees with like unique nutrients.
So it's like this combination of climate, geology, and maybe a little bit of luck that's helped these trees survive for like thousands of years.
Right. You really see how everything in nature is connected. And it makes you appreciate, how important it is that we preserve these ecosystems.
For sure. Speaking of interconnectedness, we talked before about how mountains in Japan are considered to be sacred spaces, homes to deities and spirits. What was that belief system called?
Mountain worship.
Right, mountain worship.
And it's a huge part of Shinto, which is Japan's indigenous religion.
Can you talk a little more about that? I'm really curious about how this belief system shows up in everyday life, not just, ancient myths.
Well, in Shinto, mountains are where the kami live.
The kami.
Yeah. They're spirits or deities. They embody aspects of nature. So it's not just the mountain itself. It's like the energy, the power, the spirit that it represents.
It's like seeing the mountain as a living being with, its own personality and power.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that belief system is just woven into Japanese culture. It influences everything from art and literature to like festivals and rituals.
Okay, I get it. So if someone climbs a mountain in Japan, are they doing it for the exercise? Or the views? Or the spiritual experience?
It could be all of those things. But there's definitely a sense of pilgrimage to it,
It's just,
People might climb to a certain peak to pay their respects to the kami. Or maybe to pray for good fortune. Or just to connect with nature on a deeper level.
so it's not about conquering the mountain. It's about harmonizing with it.
Yeah.
Respecting its power and importance.
Yeah, that's it. And that reverence for mountains, I think, is reflected in the care and respect that Japanese people have for nature in general.
Like the well-maintained trails we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
Is that part of that respect, or is it just, good trail maintenance?
It's both, honestly.
Okay.
There's a real sense of responsibility for preserving natural beauty, and that includes the mountains, which are seen as national treasures, to be protected for the next generation.
It's almost like those mountains are part of the cultural heritage, just like ancient temples or castles.
That's a good comparison.
The blog also mentions hot springs, or onsen, as they're called in Japan. They're in some of these mountain ranges. Is that just a coincidence, or is there a connection between mountains and hot springs in Japanese culture?
Oh, it's definitely more than a coincidence. In Shinto, water, particularly hot spring water, is seen as purifying. It's thought to cleanse the body and the spirit.
So it's like a ritual bath after a long hike.
Yeah. And the fact that so many of these hot springs are like right in the mountains adds to their spiritual significance. It's like the mountains are offering this gift of healing.
Okay, so we've got mountains that are seen as homes to deities, trails that are super well maintained, and hot springs for spiritual cleansing. It's like the whole experience of being in these mountains is kind of sacred.
It's true, and it's one of the things that makes exploring them so unique and rewarding. It's not just a physical journey, it's a spiritual and cultural journey as well.
Okay, well, I'm officially adding Japan to my bucket list, but for now, we'll stick with our virtual exploration. What else can you tell us about these mountains?
I think it's worth talking about the role that mountains have played in Japanese art and literature. They've been this constant source of inspiration for centuries. You see it in everything from like ancient woodblock prints to modern-day anime.
Yeah, that makes sense. The mountains are so visually stunning, and they're so deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. It makes sense they'd show up in art.
Right. And it's not just about capturing the beauty either. Artists often use mountains to like symbolize certain ideas or emotions. For instance, Mount Fuji, with its perfect shape and the snowy peak, is often used to represent serenity, strength, and even like national pride.
So it's almost like the mountain becomes a character in this story. It's representing something bigger than just its physical form.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see the symbolic use of mountains all throughout Japanese art history. Like in traditional landscape paintings, mountains are often shown towering over human figures. It's emphasizing the vastness and power of nature.
It's like a visual reminder that humans are just a small part of this grand and awesome universe.
I like that. And this feeling of awe and respect for nature is a big part of Japanese culture.
I'm realizing how these mountains are like a window into Japanese culture and history. They're not just pretty landscapes. They're symbols, storytellers, sacred places.
You got it. And that's what makes exploring them so much fun. It's like peeling back layers of meaning and discovering these new connections between nature, culture, and spirituality.
Before we get too lost in contemplation, I want to bring us back to the blog for a second.
Yeah.
It mentioned something about the seasons changing in the mountains, especially the colors in autumn. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, autumn in Japan is something else. And the mountains are just on fire with these vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows. As the leaves change color, it's actually a tradition in Japan to go momishigari, which means like red leaf hunting.
Red leaf hunting. So people go on like pilgrimages just to see the leaves.
They do. It's a favorite thing to do. And people head to the mountains just to see the changing seasons. It's a reminder, I think, of the beauty of impermanence, the cycle of life and death that's so important in Japanese aesthetics.
It sounds like a magical experience. I can just imagine hiking through a forest with the sunlight streaming through those leaves.
Yeah, and the crisp mountain air, the sound of the leaves under your feet, the smell of the earth.
I'm starting to understand why these mountains are so special to the Japanese people. They're not just beautiful. They're full of history and spirituality and art and a deep connection to nature.
You've got it. And there's still more to learn. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll look at the challenges of protecting these mountains, with climate change and tourism on the rise.
That's a good point. It reminds us that our appreciation for these mountains has to come with a responsibility to take care of them. We'll continue our journey in the next and final part of our deep dive. See you then. Hey everyone, welcome back. We're about to reach the summit on our deep dive into Japan's 100 famous mountains. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground already.
It's been quite a journey, for sure.
Yeah, we've scaled those volcanic peaks, walked through ancient forests, even dipped our toes in a virtual hot spring. But it's been more than that,
It has been.
Yeah, we've really learned a lot about how those mountains are like woven into Japanese culture.
Absolutely. As we reach the top of our deep dive, I think it's a good time to think about what we've learned about that connection between nature and culture and, spirituality.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm still kind of processing all this information. I keep coming back to that idea of mountain worship, the belief that these mountains are like homes to those spirits, the kami,
Yeah.
those embody nature.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a concept that might seem strange to people who aren't familiar with Japanese culture, but it's like really at the core of how many Japanese people see and interact with the natural world.
It's not just about religion, right?
Right.
It's about this deep respect for nature and, understanding how everything's connected.
Exactly. It's a perspective that values harmony. Instead of trying to control everything, it's about being a part of nature, not separate from it. And I think that's something we can all learn from.
Yeah, for sure. It's like seeing the world in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
one that recognizes that, nature has its own value and power.
That perspective has shaped Japanese culture for like centuries. You see it in everything, from art and literature to architecture and gardens. It's about like finding beauty in imperfection, accepting that things change and living in harmony with nature.
It reminds me of those autumn leaves we talked about,
Yeah.
the tradition of momishikari, going to the mountains to see the colors change. Is that another example of this connection to nature?
Oh, absolutely. It's about appreciating how beautiful nature is, even though it's temporary. Finding joy in something fleeting. It's also a way to connect with that cycle of life, death, and rebirth that's such a big part of Japanese aesthetics.
It's like a reminder that nothing stays the same, that change is going to happen, but there's beauty in that.
I think so. And that way of looking at things, I think it can bring peace and acceptance, especially in a world that can feel so I don't know, chaotic.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at things.
Yeah.
I want to change gears for a minute. Let's talk about that idea of climbing a mountain as a pilgrimage. Remember how we talked about how it's not just about the physical part, but also about the spiritual journey?
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. In many cultures, pilgrimages are about going to sacred places like temples or cities. But in Japan, that pilgrimage could be to a mountain, a natural place that's full of spiritual energy.
And it's not just about getting to the top, is it?
No, not at all.
It's about the whole journey, the challenges you face, the moments you take to think, the connection with nature.
You got it. It's like a process of changing, of pushing yourself physically and mentally, of getting away from the distractions of everyday life to connect with something bigger.
And then you get to the top and you have these amazing views, a feeling of accomplishment, and maybe even like a better understanding of yourself.
It's powerful, and it shows how transformative nature can be. Its ability to make us feel awe and humility, to help us feel connected to something greater than ourselves.
Makes me want to book a flight to Japan right now. But before I do, I have a question. It's been on my mind this whole time. With climate change and more tourists, how are these delicate mountain ecosystems being protected?
That's a really important question. Luckily, Japan has a long history of taking care of the environment. A lot of those peaks we've been talking about are in national parks, or protected areas where there are rules to limit the impact on the environment.
The blog mentions things like trail maintenance and visitor quotas,
Hmm.
and educational programs to encourage responsible hiking. Sounds like they're taking a pretty comprehensive approach to conservation.
Yeah, they are. And it requires everyone to work together, not just the government, but local communities, businesses, and visitors too. Everyone has a part to play in making sure those mountains are around for future generations.
It's a good reminder that when we appreciate these mountains, we also need to take responsibility for taking care of them.
I agree. And it goes beyond just protecting the physical space. It's about preserving the cultural heritage, the spiritual meaning, the stories and traditions that are connected to those landscapes.
It's like we've been given a peek into a world where nature isn't something to be used up,
Mm.
but it's a source of inspiration, a teacher, a spiritual guide, and that's something I think we could all use a little more of. Well, we've made it to the top of our deep dive, and wow, what a journey it's been. We've explored these geological wonders, the cultural meaning, the spiritual depth of Japan's 100 famous mountains. We've talked about ancient forests and active volcanoes, mountain shrines and hot springs. We've considered the challenges of protecting these places and how crucial it is to respect these delicate ecosystems. But I think most importantly, we've gained this new appreciation for how mountains can connect us to nature, to culture, to something bigger than ourselves.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
As we head back down to our everyday lives, I hope we take these lessons with us, the insights, the inspiration,
Me too.
and hey, who knows? Maybe someday we'll trade our virtual hiking boots for the real thing and get to experience the magic of those mountains for ourselves. But until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those hiking boots laced up, whether they're virtual or real. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.